Welcome to New Business in Later Life, where we prove that it's never too late to pursue your entrepreneurial dreams. You will meet remarkable individuals who launch successful businesses over 50, sharing their stories, challenges, and enthusiasm. Your host, Ildiko, is a former social housing professional, textile designer, and teacher who described herself as a life artist. She is now a property professional, business network host, and facilitator of the Entrepreneurs Club. Subscribe now to hear these inspiring stories every week.
What actually got you into thinking about doing this particular podcast?
Right, it takes me back a year. In the run-up to my 50th birthday, I was having thoughts that the end is closer than the beginning was. And it wasn't anything bad or, nothing sinister. It's just a sort of realistic, pragmatic realization that, I'm coming up to my 50th birthday. The end is, whether I go for 10, 20, 30, 40 or whatever, how many years, it is closer than the beginning was. And I would really like to do something amazing in my life. And then I had my birthday party in April, and every single person asked me, what is it like being 50? And I'm like, I literally had like a hot pink top and tights on with a little floral dress. And I said, look at me, I look like a 5-year-old. I don't feel 50 for certain.
Yeah.
But I then told everybody that I was having these thoughts and there's nothing wrong with them, just the realization that I really want to leave a mark in this world and do something amazing in my life. And a few weeks later, I was sitting in on a webinar when podcasting was presented, and I thought, that sounds a bit interesting. I like talking to people. I just like talking, full stop. And I always wanted to teach, and it sort of, I don't know, at that point, I didn't actually make these connections, but it just sounded interesting. So I then persuaded my husband to go along to a discovery day, as you do. You know how a funnel goes.
Yeah.
You sit in a webinar, then we went along to the discovery day, and it was indeed interesting.
Yeah.
And it really resonated with me. It was something completely out of the blue. It's not something that's been on my radar, even though my husband's been listening to podcasts for a long time. I tend to listen to audiobooks.
Yeah.
So I am obviously aware of them. But it was such a new media or thing in my life. And then he actually persuaded me to go to the 3-day training. Of course, they did like a buy one, get one half price kind of
that's
offer.
Yeah.
As I said, you know how the sales funnel goes.
Yeah.
And then we both returned in the summer to do the 3-day intensive training, which was mind-blowing. One of the most interesting things was at the very beginning, I thought, how on earth would I find 52 people to do 52 interviews with? Because by then I was kind of having thoughts about it. What would I do? I was preparing for the training and watched some training videos on it. And that was my initial worry at the very beginning. By the end of the 3 days, I already had loads of people in my mind, well over 20 people who I thought I could interview. And now I've done 12 interviews and I've got well over 30 people still on my list. And of course, I ask my interviewees to recommend as well.
Yeah, exactly.
So the list is growing and it's forever filling up. And basically, at the end of the 3 days, we made a very, very, very emotional decision to pay into a membership in the agency, with the media agency. We paid an eye-watering amount of money.
Yeah.
But for that membership, they will actually provide a lot of service, a lot of actual work to get the podcast up and running.
I think from the conversations we had, because obviously I'd explained to you, and initially I said to you about speaking to Shane, because I started my podcast here, same story as you really, literally wasn't on the radar for doing a podcast at all. I'd had lots of different things, traumatic stuff happening, all stress. And I just kept thinking about, I wonder if I could do no, I can't do a podcast. And then while that thought was going over in my mind, then all of a sudden Shane popped up on Facebook and it was like, oh, we can do podcasts and stuff now. So I straight away messaged. I was like, yes. I didn't have a clue. So unlike you, I was completely blind, didn't have any training, didn't have anything, but I just knew I'd got the gift of the gab. I could talk to people. I was interested in people, like listening to their stories and finding out more. And so for me, as I said to you in the beginning, it's more of a hobby. It's just something that I enjoy doing. It gives back to other people. And obviously we've had lots of chats as friends about the whole scenario and speaking about the sales pitch and all that kind of side of stuff. But what was it that made you then decide that this was going to be worth investing so much into? Because not only is it a financial investment, but also it's time and effort, and you're doing a lot of traveling. But last week, for example, part of that.
Let me answer the previous question.
Yeah.
So there were two things that happened during the 3 days of the intensive training. So, as I say, I was kind of between May, the discovery day, and July, the 3-day intensive training. Obviously, a lot of thoughts were going through in my head. I was already mentally preparing, doing a lot of online training. Because I thought if we go along, and we already paid some money for the 3-day intensive training as well, I want to be as prepared as I can be. So an idea had already formed in my head that what could be my topic is starting a new business over 50. Exactly what I've done. So addressing or talking to the older generation who just don't want to give up for whatever reason. And let's go and explore the reasons why people are so happy to be in business in their 50s, 60s, 70s, or even 80s and 90s. And not just being in business, because obviously I've spoken to people since who started a business in their 20s and they're still doing it and happy doing it, or have kind of completely revolutionized it at some point, some decades later, so that they can kind of remove themselves but still have the business. And of course, people take many different paths. But when I talked about it at the 3-day training, this is my topic, every single person was like, oh, wow, that sounds really interesting. And ever since, when I tell people that this is what I'm doing now, everybody without exception says, this sounds really interesting. And then when I talk to a lot of younger people would want to come on the podcast as well. I said, no, you're too young. I'm going to interview people who are over 50 because that is the niche that I'm aiming for. But I expect the listenership to be younger as well, because there could be people who have been dabbling with business or have lived a corporate life and have got this little dream. Their kids might be sort of going to university and they feel a bit more free now. That's my perceived audience.
So it's educational, isn't it, really?
Absolutely.
That's the whole thing. It is educational.
And you hit the nail on the head for me, because all my life I always wanted to teach. I don't know where it's come from. It might be from being a sort of know-it-all and forever sticking my nose into other people's conversations. But I don't know. I just love passing on knowledge.
You're inquisitive, as I said to you.
That's
You're
true.
inquisitive.
I am very, very inquisitive, and I've had this a lot in my life when people say, "Oh, that's a really good question," or like people got in touch with me through like my property education. Like we had lots of Q&A sessions through the bootcamp, and then people would get in touch with me afterwards. Oh, you ask some really interesting questions. Or like in my working life, I remember when I would go up to a colleague or a manager and say, "Oh, how about this or that, like within the company, or can I have an answer to something?" And nobody has ever asked me that question before. So all of this history behind me was kind of fueling that I could sit down with people and ask them some really interesting questions, and hopefully sort of dig out some good answers and helpful answers. And this was another brilliant connection where it is such an interesting way of teaching that I'm not preaching. I'm asking people of their experiences and passing on their experiences to the listener.